Kerchow.
Kerchow.
Wow, we're really
that doesn't
upbeat for
really
this
have
movie.
any relevance to what we're doing.
It's also not the right energy, but, you know, I support it.
Well, you know, we gotta start off a little on a high note before we get into the down in the dumps that is this a little bit movie.
Attention passengers, we're about to make a descent into your feelings. Buckle up.
Oh man, you know what? Let's start with. You feel like reading this summary?
Sure, you got it, buddy. All right, cool. Hey, listeners, just a heads up that this week we strongly encourage a dress code to maximize your listening pleasure during this episode. You're going to want to put on your biggest sweats, throw on an oversized sweater you stole from your ex, and grab those Kleenex you keep on the bedside table for you. Oh, I'm having a stroke. Bedside table for you to know what? Damn it. Because this week is a bit of a heartstring tugger. Everyone deserves a good, healthy cry to get out the frustration of daily life. So if it feels like you haven't had one of those in a good while, we suggest pausing this episode and coming back to us once you've carved out the necessary 2 hours and 15 minutes to experience the dramatic retelling of the greatest family to grace the sport of wrestling. The Iron Claw is a sports biopic about the Von Erichs and their rise to fame in the wrestling world, as well as the tragedy that continually befalls their Texas family due to a curse that could be traced back to their grandfather if the stories are to be believed.
Mother.
Grandmother. Anyway. So scuffed. It faithfully recreates the soaring highs and the devastating lows of the lives of the four brothers just trying to do the right thing by the people they love, including their father, even if he is the textbook definition of toxic masculinity and just an all-around piece of human garbage. The movie centers on Kevin, the eldest of the four, as he navigates not only his relationships with people, but also his relationship with wrestling and how he deals with the consequences of actions taken by both him and those around him. So turn the lights down low, burrito up in that blanket, and let a bunch of ripped dudes and nothing more than tighty-whities give some of the best acting performances of their career that still won't net any of them an Oscar. It's a pretty good summary. I'm so sorry I can't read.
I'm not salty. I'm not even slightly annoyed that you bungled about a quarter of that summary. It's fine. I only agonized over it for an hour.
Well, you did kind of volunteer me. You pushed me to the ledge and I jumped without grace. It was a lot of flailing.
I just wanted my friend to experience the delightful summary as he read it. I wrote it.
For the first time.
I know what it says. Yeah, exactly.
So audience members, I hope you enjoyed that. Also, before we get into the nitty gritty, in case you are not aware of the Von Erich family history or about this movie in general, this movie deals with very sensitive topics, including suicide, drug use, toxic masculinity, as we mentioned before, and all around other just harmful life things. Yeah. So in case that's not your jam for today or at all, feel free to turn us off and we'll see you next time. No harm done.
I like that you're giving this disclaimer too after I already told them to pause the episode, go watch the movie, and then come back. So they've already, assuming they followed that, they've already found out about everything you just said.
You know, if it makes you feel better, which it won't, but if it did, I essentially have the same issue on any spoiler cast. I literally write down like, hey, like in our sheet, like we covered this episode and this chapter. And then we literally never state that information until like halfway through our 2-hour episode every time because Brendan just starts moving and rolling and I just can't find a spot to like interrupt him at that point. And I'm like, all right, well, if you've made it to, number 3, you already know what's the deal. All right. We've been doing 7 of these or however many we've done so far. You know the role. If you know, you know, if you don't, turn us off.
Right. Yeah. That's so funny.
It's super annoying. I hate it. I'm like, God, Brendan, please just stop talking for 5 seconds so I can warn the people.
So I can disclaimer halfway through the episode.
Actually.
Well, you got it out at the beginning of this time, so that's good. But, right. So first of all, I'm going to get out of the way something that I think is probably the same for both of us. But I'm going to ask you, did you enjoy The Iron Claw?
I think so. Yeah, I did. I think it's a pretty good movie.
Okay. I agree. I think that this is a very well done movie and it probably deserves a lot more eyes on it than it is ever going to get. And I think it's criminal because, as I put at the end of the summary, I think all of the 4 main actors who play the brothers, especially, I mean, Zac Efron kind of steals it with his acting, but all 4 of them really do a fantastic job of portraying their characters and the way that they were in real life, apparently, from what I've seen and read in my bit of research that I've done on the family after watching the movie. So I think that this movie is probably underrated for a lot of people in what it provides. Now, of course, part of that is based off of the idea that many people are likely warned of the tragic nature and the sadness in general that awaits you watching this movie. And so people are usually averse to that. They don't necessarily want to experience that. You go to movies and movie theaters usually to escape the bad parts of daily life. So you don't want to go to the movie and feel sad more. You want to have happy things or exciting things happen. So that being said, I want to ask you, Justin, before we get into the actual movie, because you're a wrestling guy.
Yeah.
How much knowledge you had on the Von Erichs before this movie or in general, because you've been watching wrestling for a long time, right?
Yeah, but so I'll say like not much. I've heard like their names throughout, my time watching wrestling since I'll say maybe I started around like 10 years old, maybe a little older. I grew up watching like the modern stuff at that time, which is just like mostly WWE because that was like the only thing really on television at the time compared to now. And, you hear the Von Erich names. At some point, they were inducted into like the WWE Hall of Fame. Some point in my childhood, I don't remember what year. I think it was like 2016, give or take, maybe. So I've like heard their names and like everyone talks highly of them, but like I really didn't know like any of their backstory.
It was 2009, by the way.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I was there for that. Just a lot earlier than I thought. But yeah, I truly didn't have much wrestling family history knowledge here. I'm definitely not like a history buff in any capacity, let alone wrestling. I'm just a semi-casual enjoyer of the modern era.
Okay. So it's mostly by association. You've heard their name thrown around. Did you, I don't think any of them ever actually made it to the WWE, but did you watch any of their kids wrestle at all?
So Lacey Von Erich is, I forgot whose daughter. I think she is Carrie's. Yeah, she's Carrie's daughter. She had a small wrestling career. Her like mainstay debut was on TNA wrestling back in the 2010s, give or take. I did watch her during that time. I thought she was entertaining, and I have seen glimpses of what are their names? Marshall and Ross, I believe. Those are Kevin's kids. They're out in MLW and have made appearances, I think on AEW and other like promotions that are like more televised or just have a larger audience to reach. So I've seen them here and there. And they're pretty good.
Cool. So you have modern day Von Erich experience as opposed to classic. So you just never did you ever like in any capacity, not even specifically for the Von Erichs, but did you like in any capacity go back and watch older wrestling stuff?
Not this old. If I ever, I'm weird when it comes to like my interests. I'm very much, if I fall into like a quote unquote subculture or an interest of some sort, I'm really fascinated with like the here and now of what's happening because that's what like drew me in. And maybe I'll like, fall down a rabbit hole here and there about like where their origins are or what the history of this interest of mine looks like. But I tend to not really like it too much. Like with music, I like more modern stuff. With wrestling, I'm far more interested in modern stuff than any of the classical stuff just because the moves that are performed now are far more flashy and also dangerous. And so it just grabs my attention better than like the classical stuff.
So unrelated to like older Von Erich stuff, what do you tend to gravitate towards? Because I know you don't limit yourself to just the WWE anymore in terms of what you watch for wrestling.
No. So to answer that question in a very long-winded format, I watched WWE for a while because Uncle Johnny, he got me into it. He would just like watch it in my grandmother's house. And I was like, oh, this looks kind of cool. And so I got like a small like interest in that. And then when he passed, I continued watching wrestling because I thought it was like a way to like remember him. So I watched WWE for a long, long time. And then one day I was at my Uncle David's house and I was just flipping through channels and I came across TNA wrestling on Spike TV. And I had not the slightest clue that any other wrestling promotion existed in the world ever. It was only WWE. And like all of their like previous competitors, like WCW, ECW, they had like closed shop or got like absorbed by them. So I was like, it's WWE or nothing. I had no idea about like the independent circuit or even WWE had at the time had something called Florida Championship Wrestling, which is kind of like their developmental territory. So I had none of this information, none of this knowledge at the time. And then I see TNA wrestling and it's like a little bit grittier and darker, like more PG-13, sometimes almost breaking into rated R at times. So it was like an alternative to the WWE product at the time, which was trending more PG around this time when I like came across it.
Right.
So I came across like just my world expanded entirely. I came across AJ Styles from TNA, who is a phenomenal performer. Love that guy. I came across Sting in TNA because, you know, I wasn't alive to like watch all his stuff from like the 80s and 90s. So yeah, that was my introduction to things outside of WWE. And then at some point I got to college and I stumbled upon a group of wrestling nerds who introduced me to Japanese wrestling promotions and just stuff all over the world. And that's when I really like fell down the rabbit hole where I was like, wow, this is amazing. There's so much more stuff out there. And like, honestly, I like this stuff more than WWE at the time. And I still kind of hold that opinion now. But yeah, that's my wrestling journey.
I like that just over time you have these different pivotal moments where your third eye opens wider and wider into the wrestling world, and that like someone just comes along and goes, hey, you know the Japanese are doing this too, right? And you're like, what?
You know, I also forgot a step. There was at some point in my life I was, you know what probably happened? I was at like a salon with my mom. And if you're a little kid, salons it is purgatory. There is nothing for you to do if you don't have a Game Boy in your hand. And it's also true. Like salons are just bad environments. It's hot, it's stuffy, you're sucking in burning air. And it's like a Dominican spot. So like everyone speaks Spanish. And so at some point, someone flipped the channel to like Telemundo or Univision, whatever channel there was on. And I came across AAA Wrestling, which is a promotion down in Mexico. And then I got introduced to Lucha Libre style of wrestling, and they had like different rings, all the luchadors, like, you know, different cultural aspects that get involved with that. Like I also got introduced to like American people wrestle down there. Like a lot of people like travel the world in different circuits to like broaden their skill set and stuff like that. So like there's one guy named Teddy Hart. I don't think he's like a Hart family wrestling member or whatever, but yeah, I know he's trained by the Hart family. But that guy was like super impressive. He's like from Canada, and I see him like in AAA, and he's got a partner named Jack Evans, and that dude is like, that guy looks like Eminem, but he does like flips, like he is a gymnast in the ring. Seeing a dude like do a Frostberry flop into like a corkscrew and then land on his feet is like mind-boggling to me. I could never count the rotations. Sometimes I like when I see stuff like that, I literally like slow-mo a video, and I'm like, how do you do that, man? How do you just spin 3 times in the air and then land on your feet? What is this? This is like honestly some of my favorite type of wrestling. It is impressive what people can do with their bodies. But yes, I had a third eye opening of like, wow, wrestling exists out of WWE. Oh, wrestling exists outside of this country. Oh wow, wrestling's everywhere, and there's a lot of different styles and blah blah blah.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really cool. I really like that a lot. All right, so the next thing on the agenda maybe is we finally talk about the film we're here to talk to that we watched. So
I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
How much did you know coming into the movie, like about plot or anything in general?
I knew fuck all.
Okay.
I knew the Von Erichs existed, that they were a name in wrestling. I loosely heard it before. I couldn't tell you where, but the name Von Erich was not an unknown entity. I knew of them and that they were older wrestlers, but I knew nothing about their family, the history, this Von Erich curse that is talked about. So, and obviously by proxy didn't know any of their modern day, the kids wrestling. So I didn't know anything about it after that.
Did you expect this to be like a quote unquote wrestling movie, like where wrestling is like really the focus, where it's in every scene, you're watching dudes pound each other? Did you expect that at all?
So at a core level, I'd heard about the movie and knew that there were going to be sad times ahead, but I didn't know what that meant. I just knew that the movie people had described it as a bit depressing and sad, and you had to really like steel yourself for what some of the subject matter was going to end up being. But I guess and I knew it was wrestling, so I expected there to be scenes of wrestling, but I didn't expect it to just be like a 2-hour tournament arc of
Gotcha.
wrestling stuff. That is not what I expected at all. I expected basically what we got, just maybe not to the degree that we did. I knew it was going to be sad. I didn't expect to have it be as bad as it was. It was worse than worse in the sadness factor than what I had originally gone in thinking.
Okay, that's my last question. We can actually jump into the movie now.
All right, so the Iron Claw. We start off with the story of Fritz Von Erich, the father of and really the start of this whole Von Erich family dynasty here. And it's really just the end of his a match, and he is starting to make it big. It seems like he's making a little more money, but right now his family literally lives out of a trailer, and they just got a new car. And we fast forward through this really quickly because it's just Fritz's aspirations for his family and people growing up. You see two little kids in the back of the car seat who will come to learn eventually one is Kevin, and the movie would have you believe that the other is David originally when you watch it, but as we flash forward to the current day of the movie and we get Kevin and David sleeping in a bed, or sleeping in their own beds in their current day. We would learn later that the second kid is not David. It is actually their deceased older brother, Jack Jr. Very sad, which at this moment, I think they just in the movie tell you that Jack dies in some form of accident when he was 5 or 6. So they don't really go into the details. I looked up a lot of the details of their family after watching the movie because I just wanted to know. Do you know, though, is my question.
I did look up how Jack Jr. died. I did look that up.
So, and across the board on this entire movie, I'll say now, we're not going to necessarily get into the nitty gritty of what exactly has gone on with this family, because as a matter of fact, this movie is a tame version of what happened to this family. What happened in this movie is less. You get less details, obviously, just for the sake of kind of entertainment. But there are other things that happen to this family, like across the board, that the movie doesn't cover. So in this case, reality is much more horrifying than the fiction. I will say, so just to briefly go over Jack Jr.'s death, as it's not described in the movie. He basically gets electrocuted, and because at that point they're still living in the trailer, and I forget it had something to do with like wires or something leading out of the trailer for electrical purposes, maybe to a generator, whatever it was, and then he falls face first into a puddle and drowns in it. Horrible accident. And he was he's only 6, so it's the start of what would become known as the Von Erich curse later on. And I don't even know, I assume people at that point know like what happened to Jack Jr. when they like start spreading this idea of the curse, but it becomes much more, well, actually no, they do, because Kevin talks about it in the movie before any of his brothers meet their demises. Fun fact, if you haven't, maybe not fun, but Kevin is the only one who survives this movie. There are 4 brothers in the movie, and Kevin is the only one who survives. Across the entire Von Erich family, do you know about the 6th one that's not mentioned in the movie?
I feel like I came across another name who, like another Von Erich, and I forgot like where he came from. Either he was omitted entirely from like the movies for whatever purpose, or he's like, I don't know, someone's like stepkid or cousin or something like that. This is like a vague memory I think I have.
Yeah. So as a matter of fact, this movie cuts out an entire Von Erich brother. There are Fritz and his wife, Doris, I think.
I think so. That's her
something
actual
like
name.
that. Yeah. Fritz and his wife have 6 kids, 5 of which you hear about. 5 of which you hear about in this movie. 4 you actually meet.
Mm-hmm.
But in the movie, they completely cut out the youngest of them. His name was Chris. And Chris, of course, I shouldn't say of course. Chris is not in this movie because he also does not survive. He is also deceased at this point. Much, again, a tragic tale of just sort of also ending up in the wrestling world, but not having the physical strength to do it. He ends up in almost not exactly the same situation as Mike, but in a similar one where his body just isn't capable of doing it. He has actual health issues that prevent that, rather than Mike just not being in shape and throwing his shoulder out and then ending up in that coma. Chris, on the other hand, had actual medical problems like asthma and brittle bones, not very strong bones, because he had to take prednisone a lot when he was younger for some reason. I don't remember why anymore.
As a kid, Jesus. I always knew people would warn me about it, like be careful with medication. I just didn't understand exactly what happened. Holy shit.
Yeah, in this case, I think it gave him some form of like almost, I think it's osteoporosis, which is the one that like makes your bones kind of brittle and they lose density and mass. Either way. Yeah. So he just wasn't really fit for wrestling and he had to stop. And eventually at the youngest age of any of them, he takes his own life at the age of 21. So the creators, the directors of the movie, the writers, they made the executive decision to not include Chris because they needed to cut out time so that the movie wasn't 4 hours. But they also, just on a emotional level, were like, this is just too much. There's too much loss to cover and we need to cut off what happens to this family at some point. So they decided that, and also, as it would turn out, I would and that was already enough. I was like, when I read that, I was like, fine with. I was like, okay, save people a little bit of emotional trauma and just don't go over the awful things that happened to Chris Von Erich and the way his life ends. But as it would turn out, I would read later that when they were consulting Kevin, the only surviving Von Erich brother, about the movie and decision making on the movie, Kevin was okay with Chris being, I thought initially like Kevin might be insulted almost about not having this be part of the movie, but Kevin was fine because he described it as Chris had a very negative worldview and would generally say mean or negative and have a not great outlook on people. So he just thought that omitting him from the movie wasn't going to be the worst decision because it was just like the director had already said, it was just going to add way more emotional baggage onto the way this movie ran and told itself. So there's a whole Von Erich brother that just isn't in this movie for that reason.
Today I learned.
But anyway, so less on the lore side and back to the actual movie itself. I really like in these first few scenes that the movie establishes just how quickly, or how close rather, all of the brothers are. Like they really hammer in this idea that the brothers will have each other's back no matter what. And I really like this.
As someone who's like essentially an only child, I have like a half sister, but like I didn't really like grow up with her. And we're also estranged. So like seeing this family dynamic was interesting to me because like it's so foreign to me. And I always, I thought it was weird is the word I would use, of like the parents have, Fritz and Doris have this expectation that I guess the parents are providers for physical and financial needs of some sort, right? And any emotional support you might need, that's what your brother's for, as Doris says early in the movie. Like to the point where like she doesn't stick up to her husband on behalf of her son. She's like, that's between that son and your father, or, you know, between the three of you, but leave me out of it. And I thought that was very eye-opening from the very early get-go.
Yeah, and you learn again also that the boys have developed this strong bond almost out of necessity because the parents are like this. And while it's very endearing and makes the four and kind of immediately latches you onto the four brothers, you like seeing the dad is very easy to hate.
Yeah,
he has there are very glaring issues about the way that he runs the family dynamic and interacts with the boys and his wife for that matter. Now, of course, he's a product of his time, which isn't an excuse necessarily for the way he treats his kids, because there are dads out there that did a great job and like they did normal parenting things. But also this is like rural Texas we're talking about in like the 60s, 70s and like the 70s. So can I blame him for the way he's turned out? Not necessarily. Am I going to hate him for the way he treats his family? Absolutely. He is such a dirtbag. And they make that so abundantly clear at the beginning of the movie. The first scene he's in, he ranks his children.
Yeah. At the dinner or breakfast table, whatever. Mind-boggling.
Insane. You know, they talk about in general, parents will talk about how
they don't play favorites.
They don't like publicly, they don't play favorites, but parents will always tell you in secret, like, hey, like, yeah, like that one was my favorite. Fritz has no filter for that. He's going to tell you straight up. Carrie's my favorite, followed by Kevin, then David, then Mike. Straight up. But like all of you have fluidity. There can be more. You can move up and down the rank. And I'm like, it's so insane to hear something like that.
What I think is really impressive,
and see it.
Sorry to interrupt, but what I think is really impressive on the brothers' side of this situation, this dynamic, is how, at least early on, and for a majority of the movie, they don't like play into it. Like they really like recognize that this foundation their father's laid out is absolute bullshit, and they can't necessarily do anything about it, but they don't feed into it. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of scenes, and I agree. The movie does a good job of showing you that while the brothers will still do things to please their father, when it comes down to things that would, like the rankings or which ones are his favorite or which of the brothers Fritz picks to do things, they still maintain that strong familial bond, and they don't hold it against each other. It's never tearing them apart from each other. There's at no point, and I was very worried because again, didn't know shit about the movie or the family sort of lineage and ties together. I was very worried that at the beginning of the movie, when they establish how close the boys are and then how kind of divisive the dad can be between them or with them, I was very worried that we would just get a kind of basic plot line of eventually this whole wrestling thing starts beginning to eat at the brothers and how they interact with each other and that tight bond, but it never happens. I'm like waiting for it the entire like 2-hour movie, and we almost get there a couple of times, like when David dies and Carrie and Kevin are both fighting for, like, they're arguing with their father over who's going to take the title match against Ric Flair for the heavyweight championship. And Kevin steps up, but Carrie's like, no, I can do it. I want to do it. And then they flip the coin. Carrie wins, of course. Kevin is like upset, but maybe less so because it was just up to chance. And then when he wins, he's congratulatory of Carrie, goes to the kitchen, hugs him when they're just the two of them sitting there. Or again, between these two characters, there's the end, kind of the end, when Carrie is trying to get back in the ring and they're sparring. This is right before Mike takes his life. The scene before Mike takes his life, and they're in the ring at nighttime. Carrie's getting very frustrated, and Kevin is also getting frustrated at Carrie being so stubborn about this. And it seems like, there could be a potential moment where this just kind of reaches a breaking point, but it doesn't. Kevin helps Kevin back up. Kevin helps Carrie back up. And they kind of just continue sparring, and he encourages him. Two different characters. When David gets chosen to be the one who takes on the sort of Von Erich mantle, what was that specific moment again? Where was it the heavyweight? Like he's going to start giving David the chance at the heavyweight title, right?
Sorry, re-ask your question.
When they're like all lined up in the locker room at some point, and they're sitting on the bench after something, and Fritz tells the three of them that David is going to be the one who gets the shot at the heavyweight now instead of Kevin.
Yeah. It was the explanation was Kevin's like a good in-ring performer, but he doesn't have like charisma or like microphone skills to do speeches or promos as they're known in the industry. But David is really excellent in that capacity of selling himself, essentially. And so Dad gives him the ball, essentially. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Yeah, it was just, I was trying to fish for the surrounding context again. I just couldn't remember. But yeah, so that.
I want to say that's
another moment.
Did they, at some point during the movie, there is a match between the Von Erichs and the Fabulous Freebirds, a famous tag team in wrestling scene at this time. They were like a trio. It was trio versus trio. I don't remember if the brothers win that match and they have this locker room scene. I could be wrong on that.
They do.
Okay.
I think you're right, actually. It is that, because they win that fight. They're all standing there with their belts, and then Fritz jumps on. And he like directly challenges the organizers of one of the bigger leagues. It's not the WWE yet. I think it was the NWA.
I know WWF makes an appearance. I think at this particular scene they're talking to the NWA, because that's like the goal for Fritz and everyone. Essentially, it's like, I never got my NWA title shot or whatever happened to him. And so he has made it everyone's problem to fulfill this goal for him. So I think you're right. He like calls out Ric Flair or something, or no, it wasn't Ric Flair. I think it was like Harley Race, maybe. He calls out somebody, whoever the champion is, and they were like, "Yo, I dare you to come down here and face my sons," and blah blah blah.
No, this is past the Harley Race point, because Kevin almost like gets paralyzed in that ring or in that match.
Yeah.
Like that was wild. I thought that was going to be like a turning point for the movie, that Kevin just ends up paralyzed and is out of wrestling forever. Not the case, of course. So that's prior. This is like, he calls out one of the organizers of like the NWA directly. Like Fritz is one of the organizers of the WCCW because he owns it. Mm-hmm. And then so Fritz calls out that other guy to like garner this beef, to more publicize the potential for his sons. And then he says in that speech, in that call out, that David is specifically going to be the one. And then Dave, but this is part of what I love too, because David immediately looks over at Kevin and is like, I'm sure Dad doesn't mean that I'm actually going to be the one going first. And Kevin looks at him and again, this is Zac Efron at like peak dramatic performance. He just looks over at David with this sadness in his eyes. He's like, Dad doesn't make those kinds of mistakes. Yeah. And that's just the end. And then Fritz turns around himself and is like, is there a problem here? We got issues? You want to take something up with me? And they're like, no, Pa, we're good. And then they go back to showboating that they just won the triple tag team thing. And man, it's just so hard to swallow. And this isn't even the worst of like the sad parts of the movie yet.
How do you feel about the pacing of the movie? Because for a 2 hour and like 15-ish minute movie, I felt like the pacing was phenomenal. that like it's so whoever directed this movie, or however movies are formulated in terms of people's jobs, but they are really good at crafting this story in a way where you're jumping from scene to scene to scene to scene, and it feels quick, but not too quick, where you're like, what's going on? Well, like, I'm at a breakneck speed. But also, there's never a moment where you're like, something feels left out or not given enough screen time kind of thing. That's how I felt, at least.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree. I think especially the scenes that were shown to us and in the way that they were, I think they do a really good job of putting together the timeline of events. And even in a macro level, I think the movie does a really good job of the first half, more or less, being the success story side of things, and then you hit this middle mark at Kevin's wedding, more or less, when we get the bathroom scene between Kevin and David is clearly just dying outright. Like, he's coughing and throwing up blood into a toilet, and he's just like, I'll just walk it off, it's fine, I don't need to go to the doctor. Kevin's like, no, you got to go to the fucking doctor. You can't go to Japan, because at this point, David has made it a bigger name for himself, and
he's touring all over the world to get his run-in, his practice, essentially. And then it's supposed to like all culminate to a match with Ric Flair for the NWA title. Yeah.
And so I think that is already set in stone, even. Like, he's going to fight Ric Flair. He's just doing this world tour thing that is ending in Japan, or sending him to Japan, and before he comes back for the title fight. And Kevin is pleading with him, you can't go to Japan. Just go to a doctor, get yourself fixed or checked out, and then you can always get this fight in later. You can still do this later. It doesn't have to be now. Because by this point, Kevin is sort of starting to realize, with the help of Pam, who we can talk about in a second too, because I love Pam.
I love Pam.
He's starting to realize by this point that there are more important things to worry about in life than A, pleasing your father, and B, wrestling. And those two things are obviously interlinked heavily, but especially the wrestling part, which he's always just been his entire identity, basically. He's now having to untangle himself from that and focus on people, and more importantly, his relationships with other people, like his brothers, on more than just this competitive wrestling level, seeing them more as people and as his brothers more than anything. And Pam is the one who really introduces this idea to him and gets him to be more forward thinking with developing this mindset. And to rewind towards the beginning of the movie, their first date is just so sweet, man. Them meeting too, like she is much more forward with her ideas and feelings, and she goes and gets his autograph at the end of that one show when David debuts. And then they have that date in the cafe, or wherever it is, the bar, whatever it is that they're at,
diner or something.
And it's just so nice, dude. Tell me you loved it as much as I did.
Okay, I've been saying this in my head for like the past couple of days after watching this movie. None of these people are characters, right? Like, these are real human beings that are being displayed in this movie. Yes. But Pam is the best character in this movie. She is... Like, she honestly, if Kevin never comes across Pam, I can only assume the worst for Kevin. Pam is a saving grace for this film in terms of like, she's a like literal shining light in Kevin's life and just in the movie in general, because she is the one who constantly brings alternative ideas or anything really to Kevin and to the movie. Like, bro, she's a feminist, all right? She's grown up in like Bible Belt, Texas, during it's like 60s, 70s, right? And she's like, all right, if you're down with me, you gotta be okay with me being a vet and then owning my own practice, and like, I want kids, but like, I ain't no stay-at-home wife, you know what I mean? She has so much life and gusto. She's got gusto, bro. Pam's got gusto.
She got hella gusto, bro.
But she's also like, she does so much emotional care for Kevin. Personally, a little bit more than I would offer. given certain things that happen in the movie as they get older. But she is like really just that dude's rock. All right. Like during their date, I don't exactly know how they start the conversation, but Kevin mentions his brother, Jack Jr. And he's like, oh, I'm not the oldest. The actual oldest died at like 6 or whatever. And Kevin just kind of like says it so nonchalantly. And it's clear, at least to me, that like he hasn't processed that, because Pam is just like, I'm so sorry. She gives him a hug. And then I think like for me as an audience member, I see the look in Kevin's eyes and the wheels start to turn where he's like, I really haven't processed the death of my older brother, huh? Oh, well, I was a little kid. I guess whatever, life moves on kind of thing. And that's where really the rock gets rolling or whatever. And Pam is just the best person on earth in this movie, honestly.
Yeah, I especially like what you said before about how Pam is just such a rock for him, and that there is a high likelihood that Kevin also doesn't make it to adulthood or to
68 years old as he is right now.
To the very old. I think he's older than that. He's got to be older than that. I think he's in his 70s minimum right now.
I'd believe it. He was born in 57, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, he's in his like mid 70s. Anyway, I think along the same lines as you. There's next to no shot that Kevin makes it much farther than any of his brothers did without Pam, because she's so forward thinking and open minded in the way she talks, thinks, acts, reacts to things that Kevin does and says, and the way he's been living his life up to that point. And then they talk about the Von Erich curse very briefly and luck at the end of that scene, where Kevin is just saying like, it was just, it's not a curse. I don't believe in curses. It was just some bad luck what happened to Jack. And Pam's like, I don't believe in curses either, but I also don't believe in things just being lucky or unlucky. I think we make our own luck as people. And that's a very poignant way to put something and be able to spin it so that the person you're talking to can kind of reshape the way that they're thinking about this, rather than just outright denying the way that they are processing this thing.
The way you describe Pam's thinking there is that like she has given Kevin way more agency, or is trying to introduce that concept to him, as opposed to like, oh, luck is luck. What can you do? And she's like, well, there's something. At least that's what I believe. And that's just one of the many things that like I guess motivates Kevin and really helps him get a grip on his own life.
Yeah, and it's just so like, and then this happened. I mean, the date is only the tip of the iceberg. It's the sweetest tip of the iceberg, in my opinion. But just throughout the movie, there are so many examples of, and I just, I hope none of this is embellished. I would love so much that Pam is just exactly like this. In real life, and was during this time, because she's just such an exemplary human being in general for the way that she acts, and she's very patient and understanding of the way that Kevin's been raised and what his father is like, and so adjusts the way that she is dealing with Kevin and his sorts of different trauma and baggage. Now, I think you also make a good point before, where she carries a lot of the emotional weight between both of them. Kevin is probably not doing a whole lot of helping Pam through anything because he's got so much else to deal with. In real life, it's just not shown to us in the movie anyway. In real life, maybe it's not the case. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe he does end up with a little bit more of the emotional baton in this race, but through the lens of the movie, she's probably doing way too much, but is still willing to do it because she cares for Kevin. And we start to see some of those cracks in it when I think when Mike takes his life and we have that funeral scene. Kevin is beginning at this point to believe for real that the Von Erich curse is a thing, and he's distancing himself from Pam and the kid that they have now because he doesn't want I think it's Ross. I think
I think
Ross
so,
is
yeah.
the older one. He doesn't want Ross to end up catching the curse, as he describes it. And it's just so like heart-wrenching to see her standing there like pleading with him to just come home, like be with us. It's the way to heal. And he's just like, no, I can't go anywhere near this kid because otherwise it's just going to cause problems for him. And he sleeps at the gym. He does literally anything else to keep him away from the house. And yeah, there's just times where Pam just feels like she's doing too much, and it's almost a breaking point. You know, she still lives at their apartment, but never sees him because he's not home. So it's a tough time. It's tough.
There's that scene. I don't know if it's after David's funeral or after Michael's, where Kevin is just really rolling in the deep with his emotions for losing his brother, and Pam walks up. She's like, "Hey, I got to go to work." And Ross is crying. I need you to like help me out here. And he's just like, I don't think, at least the way the movie portrays it, he's saying like, no, I can't. And I don't think he's like on the same planet as Pam in that initial moment. And then I don't know what like jolts him, but he like kind of gets his act together enough to be like, oh, sorry, like give me Ross, go to work. But yeah, it is rough. Pam, God bless her. She does more than I think any person could or maybe even should do given her circumstances, but she's a better person for it.
Yeah, I agree. So, all right, moving on a bit from Pam, though, we can start kind of rolling into, I guess, the back half of the movie and the things that make this the reason the film exists. So it mostly starts with aforementioned David throwing up and coughing blood into a toilet. And not long after, he goes to Japan after all, ignores Kevin's advice, and it's literally the next scene too. Anyway, like there's Kevin and David have this sort of heartwarming kind of scene where again, Kevin is admitting that he resented David for a bit, but ultimately came to this realization that, this is David's shot. Like he should be happy for his brother. And then they have a brotherly bonding moment over a bloody toilet. Then they go and they dance. And then the next scene is Kevin pulling up to the family ranch, and they have received the news that David died in his hotel room in Japan. So he went after all, ignoring Kevin's advice, didn't go to the doctor, and it turns out he died from some like intestinal infection of some kind. I think it was
enteritis is what I looked up, which is an inflammation of the small intestine, I believe.
Yeah. I also, along those lines, read that some people believe this to be a kind of cover-up by the Von Erich family, and that his actual cause of death was a drug overdose. And oh man, I'm gonna kick myself. Where is his name? There was one of David's fellow wrestlers who I think was on the tour with him, or had to be on the tour with him. And was like his good wrestling buddy. Oh, Bruiser Brody. That was his name. This guy, this wrestler, Bruiser Brody, who was apparently like his good friend, like hid the evidence of drug overdose and like flushed all the drugs down the toilet or whatever. And that the enteritis was just a cover up. So obviously, for the sake of maybe protecting or not demonizing David, the film chooses to go with the enteritis instead. But so who knows what's real and what's not the true cause. But either way, David loses his life from some means at, I think he was 25, I want to say, 58 to 84. Yeah. So he was 25, and that wouldn't even be the youngest, as mentioned earlier with Chris taking his own life at 21. But either way. So, and then this is another. So right after this, they do the funeral stuff, and the kind of closing scene to this chapter is this decision between Carrie and Kevin on who's going to take the heavyweight title. And this is a conversation they have the same day, the same night that they hold the funeral for David. Their fucking dad can't let shit rest for one fucking day. He has to. Maybe this is embellishment on the part of the movie. I'm just gonna take it as fact that this actually happened the same day. What a piece of shit. Let us just mourn the family death for one day without thinking about work.
And I think it's like right before this, like I don't know if it's like beginning of the funeral or at some point in the movie, Fritz like talks to the boys. He's like, all right, I want to see no tear in your eyes. He like rips off the sunglasses off of Carrie, who's like clearly like upset over what happened. He's like, we're going to get in there. We're going to mourn your brother. And then we're going to get back to business. All right. No crying, man the fuck up kind of thing. And I'm like, my God, it's like, it's almost as if he doesn't recognize his own son is dead. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And this unfortunately continues to be a theme throughout the film, and the way you start delving into Fritz's mindset on these things. And again, this is kind of, he's a product of the time that he grew up in, where men are just supposed to buckle up, not cry, and deal with everything that comes at them with gritted teeth and pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. So it's infuriating to watch, even if I know why it's happening. So, you know, then again, we get Carrie becoming the one who takes on Ric Flair, wins, gets the heavyweight title, and then immediately throws it all away. This isn't even Von Erich curse. This is him being fucking stupid. This is the only example of an unfortunate thing that happens to them that is of their own making, pretty much. Because Carrie, upon winning the belt, you know, he comes home, clearly has been drinking, trying to come down from the high of winning, and you watch him have this conversation with Kevin, and then he's like, I'm gonna go for a ride to kind of calm myself down. He's clearly been drinking. He stumbles out of the house a little bit and gets on his motorcycle and crashes somehow and loses his foot. So now Carrie's missing a foot, and he has to deal with the consequences of this action, which, spoiler, he doesn't do very well. And rather, he does kind of well, but then really doesn't. So Carrie undoes his own problem or his own success, and then it's his own struggle. He's got to learn to walk with this prosthetic foot again, and so now we've got a bit of a void again in the Von Erich family wrestling name, where Kevin is once again the only one wrestling under the Von Erich name. So what does Dad do finally? Dad finally puts the hammer down on Mike, who's really just been trying to do his own thing in music and even video production. Like, I guess I'll just say production, because he talks about earlier in the film, the camera angles that were taken during the Harley race fight between Kevin and Harley. And so he's clearly got a mind for more artistic things and isn't necessarily as physically inclined, but Dad doesn't give a fuck.
Bro, it blows my mind.
Dad wants everybody to do it.
So to intersect here, earlier in the movie, we get a glimpse into Mike's creative endeavors, right? He's in a band. This kid plays at least 6 instruments. I only heard viola, violin, and I'm pretty sure he plays guitar. And he also listed up a bunch of other stuff I couldn't remember in this movie. And then he's mentioning this to Pam, who comes over for like breakfast or whatever. And so the whole family get together and they're eating and they're talking. And Doris mentions that, you know, when she met Fritz and when she fell in love with him, he was like a classically trained clarinet player or something like that, and he traded that for like football or something like that, because he's like, oh, musicians are never going to make money. Typical line of thinking, right? Especially for that time. And it is so infuriating and painful to just like, Fritz is so dense to like, he doesn't recognize his own irony, you know what I mean? And I'm like, bro, your kid is super talented. I can't play anything, let alone play 6+ instruments and like be really good at it. You know, and I'm like, it is insane, man. It is insane. I need to get it off my chest.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm glad you said it, because otherwise I would have. It makes it's so again, I'm going to use the word infuriating to just watch him swat down his own child in a field that he's clearly excelling in. They don't ever go into, and maybe I should have looked this up and seen if there was anything about this, but there's no indication one way or another how Mike actually learned these instruments. I'll be honest, part of me also kind of is like, I think maybe he just said a list of instruments to kind of impress Pam. I think that might have been the case, and he may have been lying. We only see him play guitar, so part of me is also fair, like, maybe he clearly just has kind of like a said little, those things.
From my perspective, Mike kind of has a crush on Pam, like a little bit. Yes. I think it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But also I was willing to believe that during this time that like public education was willing to give you like actual arts skills. They're actually willing to fund the arts back in the 70s. They're like, yeah, here's a clarinet kit. Join the band or whatever. You know?
Yeah. So that's the other side of it. He could have been telling the truth. And if he did, he probably taught himself most of those instruments. Even time in school can only get you so far. You learn like one or two instruments, maybe. If you're a prodigy, you learn a couple. And it seems like if that was the case, if Mike is telling the truth and he knows this list of like 4, 5, 6 instruments, he's amazing. He's so incredibly musically inclined, but Fritz is so far up his own ass about sports being the way forward for the Von Erich family that he can't recognize that not only has Mike inherited his musical talent, he's built on it and surpassed it to a point where he could have potentially been successful in the music industry just based off of raw talent. And it's, you know, it's an especially tragic thing later when Mike has this wrestling accident where he just tears his shoulder or something and then has to go for the surgery. And during the surgery, he ends up experiencing something called toxic shock syndrome, which is apparently something that happens with, I think it's some sort of bacterial infection almost.
My understanding was that like it's basically your blood is infected and like your blood is circulating everywhere. So that's like a hard thing to tackle. That's why it's like super serious. That's my understanding. I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, I'm a little fuzzy on exactly how he ended up with it, or if like it was just a thing he had in it, and the surgery kind of exacerbated it.
I think it was during surgery. Fucking one of these surgeons didn't clean a fucking scalpel or some dumb shit. Maybe left a fucking cotton swab in his shoulder during surgery. Happens, unfortunately. I'm sussed out by those surgeons. That's all I'm saying, man. All right. You don't just end up with toxic shock syndrome. All right. Something had to go wrong. All right. And the only person awake to do anything is the surgeons. That's all I'm saying. All right.
So actually, I wonder, you know, this is another thing I maybe should have looked up in hindsight now. I wonder what exactly compensation wise they got out of that, because this is clearly like this seems very clearly like a medical malpractice sort of thing. So I wonder if they ever ended up with lawsuits over this. But either way, so Mike ends up in a coma that he will come out of and begin to make a partial recovery, but it kind of becomes clear over time that Mike is having a lot more mental issues now because of this, and they have a very heartbreaking scene of him like trying to play guitar again, and it's just not working very well. He can't, no matter whatever part of it is that he can't remember chords, or he can't move his hands and arms the way he used to before. He just can't play the guitar anymore. And it seems like that particular moment was depicted in the film as the real breaking point, because he just loved music so much, and now he can't do the one thing that was sort of keeping him sane among all of this forced wrestling stuff. So Mike eventually takes his own life because of it. He ODs on some drugs, and it is only the second tragedy of 3 to be placed in this movie, because not super. So this is the one part where you mentioned before that the movie has really good pacing, and this is sort of the one moment where I think maybe it's specifically just to hammer home just how quickly things go wrong for them.
Yeah.
But they go pretty quickly from Mike ODing on prescription pills to Carrie making it big in the WWF and then ending his own life because he literally fears the Von Erich curse so much that he can't stand it. And also he's still struggling the entire time with his right foot being gone, calling it a deformity even. And the only thing in between this is Kevin's fight versus Ric Flair that happens eventually. Otherwise, it's just loss after loss after loss. So this is the one point where the pacing of the movie kind of speeds up so that we can kind of hammer home again just how quickly things can turn for people in general, but how they did for the Von Erich family.
I want to cut back to something.
Yeah.
Two things. One with Mike, this was probably before he passes, but my understanding from one of the scenes is that it appears that Mike like made their entrance music. Like I can see him like plugging into an amp and he's recording stuff. One sec. Sorry about that. So like my understanding was that like, man, this kid who's like forced into wrestling, I don't know if he was forced into the ring yet. He probably was. Actually, was he? I don't know. He's like clearly involved because Fritz happens, right? But in my mind, from what I understood, was that like he plays a portion of like, yo, he made their theme song. That's incredible. Like and then like assuming I'm correct, I could be wrong, but assuming that is correct information I've perceived from the movie, it is just that much more painful to recognize what's happening to Mike between, you know, his relationship with Fritz, his loss of musical ability because he has brain damage from the toxic shock syndrome / coma. And, you know, the movie portrays him clearly having like difficulty with like speech and probably fine motor skills and stuff like that. And I'm like, God, that sucks. And then in case because I think we glossed over it, the way Carrie gets involved in the movie is he was, I assume he was in college, maybe.
Right.
But
yes.
he was training for the Olympics in shot putting, I believe is a sport he was playing.
I think it's discus. I think he was going for discus.
Yeah. He was talented in discus,
which is why Fritz has ranked him as his favorite, by the way, because he's literally on his way to being like a gold medal Olympian, which in Fritz's mind is like a higher tier than just heavyweight. But either way, go on.
Interesting mental gymnastics he does there. Anyway, but unfortunately, this was the 1980s Olympics?
It was the 1980 Olympics,
which is peak Cold War, and the Olympics were supposed to be held in Russia, I believe. And the U.S., along with presumably other countries, pulled out of the Olympics. So Carey loses his shot at making it big. And so he wasn't going to get the opportunity for a minimum of 4 years, if, you know, however long it took for the U.S. to go back into the Olympic scene. Anyway, so he loses the opportunity, unfortunately, due to his, you know, just out of his control. Moves back home. He gets in the ring, starts training. And the other thing I wanted to mention was before we recorded here for this movie a couple weeks ago, I was listening to this podcast called The Vassals of Kingsgrave, I believe. They're a podcast that Poupée mentioned to me. Shout out to Poupée, community member. They do a bunch of stuff. I think it's mostly Game of Thrones related content. Anyway, they did a review of this movie, and these two women who are speaking, one of them points out how Carey, throughout in the movie at least, seems to have, like, clearly he's losing his grip, right? And from her perspective, it would appear that he doesn't necessarily have like a death wish exactly, but he is clearly living a reckless lifestyle, possibly to, like, you know, feel something quite literally, or he's just like, listen, this is how I go out, right? Like he's clearly living on an edge, and he's been walking up to it or living on it for quite some time up until his unfortunate demise. So I just wanted to mention that. So shout out to Vassals of Kingsgrave. That was a cool episode. Shout out to Poupée. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. It makes a lot of sense when you examine all of the things that Carey does throughout the I almost said show. With the movie, because he's the only one, despite kind of the implication for David, Carey's the only one who is explicitly seen taking drugs. There are multiple instances of watching him either inject something, probably heroin, or crushing up prescription pills and snorting them. Stuff like this sort of lends itself to that idea you're talking about, where he's just been living on this extremely reckless lifestyle seemingly ever since losing his shot at the Olympics. So I
Mhm.
think that's a good call out for the subtlety of Carrie's sort of spiral down into what ends up being the end of his life. Yeah. The thing I also wanted to talk about too quickly, sandwiched between Mike and Carrie, is again the fight between Kevin and Ric Flair. And despite the fact that Kevin struggles with this for a long time in terms of he's just getting off of Mike's death and now is having to be the sole breadwinner in the wrestling side of things again. And he's going to fight Ric Flair for the title. And this is like the big moment. But then he throws it away and he uses the Iron Claw for the first time ever, seemingly, and on Ric Flair. But he does it for too long. The ref tries to get him off, and Kevin just waves him away, continues to squeeze Ric Flair's skull. At some point, drawing blood. I don't know, like, squeezing somebody's head isn't, like, unless you're literally superhuman and cracking their skull, that's not really how it works. So I don't know at what point they ended up drawing blood, if like some of those punches were actually real, maybe, because he does throw punches at Ric Flair's face.
So I
don't know.
Technically answer this question. Like, when this scene was happening, I was asking myself, it's like the movie does, it treads an interesting line where it doesn't necessarily hide the fact that wrestling is scripted, but it doesn't like shove it in your face. And so in this particular moment between Kevin and Ric Flair, I was asking myself, was Kevin scripted to win the match? And then just has like a breakdown of sorts, and he like throws his own shot away, whatever, right? What I can say about Ric Flair is, if his younger days were anything like his older days, because he's been wrestling for way too fucking long, Ric Flair will bleed for anything and everything. He he will intentionally like blade himself, is like the term in the industry, where he's like, oh, just gonna nick my forehead and like, wah! So that dude will bleed for anything. He's like, oh man, I got like hit by a fly. Whoosh, look at me, I'm a crimson mask. Ric Flair's insane.
Okay, all right.
So that could have been a thing.
Yeah, I think with that context, it probably makes sense. Yeah, because at one point, like they're fighting and whatnot, and then Kevin puts him in the Iron Claw, and suddenly you realize that underneath his face, or rather underneath Kevin's hand, you can see blood like staining Ric Flair's hair. And I'm like, when did this happen?
Interesting.
Like, it was all
I
kind of fake punches and stuff.
I saw like Ric Flair cover the blood in the locker room, but I missed that detail of like how it started in the match.
Yeah. You see it during, like, it might be more prevalent beforehand. I didn't rewind, but I noticed it when the Iron Claw was being put down on him, and I was like, oh, when the fuck did this happen? And I just assumed that Kevin had probably hit him with real punches and not fake punches, because along the scripted, not scripted lines. So yeah, where was I going? Oh, right. Okay. So just in general, so Kevin throws his shot away. He gets disqualified. Ric Flair wins by default, by disqualification, by DQ. And then then there's this locker room scene between Kevin, his brother Kerry, and Fritz. They're like, what the fuck happened? Kind of lending itself to maybe Kevin was scripted to win, now that you put that idea out there. And so they're like, this was your shot. You just completely threw it away for what? Like, you just lost your temper? What the fuck's the matter with you? And even Carrie in this moment is like really upset, because this was supposed to be Kevin taking up the mantle for Carrie, having lost the heavyweight title by injury. And so Ric Flair, I assume, was just handed it back. Maybe. I don't know how that worked. I just assumed Ric Flair was handed the title back because Carrie could no longer perform or do it anymore. And so now it was up to Kevin to pull it back into the Von Erich family. So, but what ends up happening is this loss to Ric Flair becomes a very positive turning point for Kevin in his life, because he realizes he very firmly at this point grasps the idea that he doesn't need to do the wrestling thing to this degree anymore. And not long after this locker room scene, I don't remember if it's like directly the next scene or what, but he goes back home to Pam and Ross. And actually, I think at this point they have both kids. They have Ross and Marshall. So either way. And then, so like, I think they embrace whatever. And then not long after, you get him picking up the kids from off the school bus, and he's making dinner because Pam's at work at the vet office. I actually don't know if Pam ever ends up with her own practice or not. Another thing I should have researched.
That's a timeline I want.
I sure hope so. That's a timeline I hope panned out also. But so Pam's at work one way or another, and he makes dinner, and he plays with the kids, and it's all very sweet. Like this is normal family stuff that Kevin is getting to engage in finally, because he's let go of this need to please his father and be such a slave to wrestling now. And that's the point where Carrie steps up again as the Von Erich. I keep wanting to say Elric.
That's not very equivalent exchange of you.
God damn it. So this is Carrie stepping up for the WWF thing, and then he wins, but it comes he mentions on the phone with Kevin later that the WWF isn't actually, despite this win that he's achieved, he's not actually getting his contract renewed for another season or more wrestling matches, what have you. So they've clearly run their course on Carrie, and Carrie's like sick and tired of it, among all of the other things that have piled onto him over his entire life. And so all of these things combined drive Carrie to suicide, resulting in, and actually in the timeline of the Von Erich family, Carrie is actually the last one to take his life. By this point, Chris Von Erich, again not mentioned in the movie, has already taken his life. So this is in the real life scenario, Carrie is the fifth of 6 kids to end up dead. 4 having been by three having been by self-harm. So you get this really, and because now Kevin is in this better emotional place where he cares for people even more so than before, and he's more stable in his life, you get this really, really heart-wrenching scene of him finding Carrie, or rather hearing and then finding, and he almost kills his father because he's finally letting out all this pent-up emotion of how fucked Fritz has made their entire family to this point, and how Fritz didn't care. You didn't protect them. You didn't protect any of them. And he almost just chokes out his father on the ranch right then and there, out of just pure rage. And it's, and then he carries Carrie into the home, lays him on the table, and then there's this vision, which is just so like this. There's 2 points in the movie that actually got me to tear up, and this is one of them, with this just very, for lack of just a more nuanced way to put it, just beautiful scene of Carrie on this boat, or rather, actually, he walks out of the ranch, and he's jumping on his. He now has he has both feet again. His right foot is there, and he's on the boat, just meandering down this little creek, and he sees his brothers off in the 2 of his brothers off in the distance. David and Mike are waiting for him on this like little bridge thing. He takes the coin that Fritz used for the heads or tails between him and Kevin, and he leaves it behind on the boat. And he goes and meets up with his brothers, and he meets Jack Jr. for the first time, because they didn't exist at the same time. And it's just so, the way all of the brothers are portrayed, like talking to each other, and the embrace, and especially with him meeting Jack Jr., it's just so well shot. The sound design is awesome, and it made me tear up like a fucking baby. I think especially it lends itself to my sort of standing as also an older brother, that I kind of feel this way. It's just a beautiful scene in general, but I think I'm particularly affected by my defensiveness of my own sister. So, that and so this is especially like for Kevin in the movie, this is just the worst part for him.
Mm-hmm.
And just such an even harder turning point than the loss to Ric Flair, because he's officially letting go of, like, for good, his father and everything that his father stands for after this point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very powerful and sad.
Yeah. And so coupling along after this incident, Doris has her own, I don't know if it's a breaking point or an epiphany or whatever internal growth she goes through. I think after losing Carrie or Michael, after enough loss, she realizes how unhappy she is in her marriage. She starts to take up painting again, which she had a discussion with Michael about. Of like, she just like to paint, right? And so Fritz comes home one day after working, probably their ranch or whatever, and he sees Doris painting, just doing her thing, and he's like, "Where's dinner?" She's like, "I didn't make anything. I wasn't hungry." And he's just like baffled by like, "What the fuck about me?" And this isn't shown in the movie, but Doris eventually leaves his ass, and good for her. And also at this same time, at this point in the movie, Fritz has sold WCCW, their promotion, to Kevin, or he's giving it to Kevin. And Kevin's like trying to wash his hands clean with both wrestling and also like I think there's a semblance of like money troubles or like math ain't adding up. So he sells the promotion to Jerry Jarrett, who is the father of Jeff Jarrett, who he's very well known in the wrestling industry as like a performer, and also he's had his own hand in running promotions and stuff like that. And so Kevin finally washed his hands clean of everything with relating to wrestling. He's like, out of my life. And our movie, I believe, ends with Kevin is sitting in the backyard, maybe with Pam, and he's watching his sons Ross and Marshall just playing around or whatever, and he just starts crying. And his sons approach him and he's like, "Hey, what's up, Dad? Why are you crying?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, boys. I shouldn't be crying. I'm just sad. I'm no longer a brother." And his boys are like, "Well, everyone cries, Dad. We cry all the time, and we'll be your brothers." And that broke me. That's probably an embellishment if I had to be for real about it, but even if it is, just a really powerful scene. And then we get like title credits.
This is of course the other moment that sort of makes me more emotional to watching the movie. And yeah, I mean, Kevin begins to perpetuate to his kids before they say something the same sort of ideology that his dad was, where he says men don't cry, men shouldn't cry. And his kids, having been born to and raised by the ever so lovely Pam, are like, no, like it's okay, like we do it all the time, men can cry, it's fine, Dad. And then they ask him, like, why are you sad? And he gives the line that you said, well, it's because I used to be a brother and now I'm not. And then the kids offer to be his brother, and I'm like, oh fuck. Like this is especially the point where I'm like tears are coming down my face, and I'm like, God damn it, this fucking movie. I wasn't supposed to cry at this movie. Like, I knew it was sad, but I didn't think at the end of a movie about a tragic wrestling family, like I'd be crying and feeling emotional over something like this. But then of course it ends on this happy note with Kevin being with his kids and playing around, and then Pam walks up and they're a big old happy family. I think they have a dog now too. And then we get in the post credits, we get some more, for lack of a better term, like statistics, sorts of end notes on the Von Erich family about how they get inducted into the Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2009. And I want to say there's one other before they talk about the family, because then they move on to the family where they have two of their own kids, Ross and Marshall. Not shown in the movie is a marriage that Carrie has, and they have two kids, one of which we mentioned before with Lacey. They have another one, Holly, who is, I think, actually older than Lacey, but there's really Holly doesn't get into wrestling. As a matter of fact, I couldn't really find anything on what she does for right now as her like career path. Clearly, she's stayed much more out of the limelight than most others in her family. So the movie mentions that there's 4 kids total in the Von Erich families. So those 4, and they all live on the ranch, Kevin's ranch, with their 13 grandchildren.
Wild.
And
that's a lot of grandkids.
It's a lot of grandkids. That's I don't know which of the kids have how many of their own kids, but that's an average of about 4 per
my god
Von Erich children. I guess second generation, I guess we'll call it. Second generation being Kevin's kids and then Carrie's kids. The third generation being the grandkids. So that's substantial. That's a lot of kids. So, but the fact, and then they all live on the farm, and it's like it's nice, and there's a big family photo at the end, and it's very heartwarming. And holy shit, did you see the airtime on that one kid?
Yeah, I did. And that family photo, that kid's flying.
That kid is he's basically on the moon, dude. that and the kid is loving it. Oh my god. there's a couple people off to the other side of the family photo that are looking at this child literally launched 15 feet into the air. It's so funny because somebody is obviously underneath this kid that tossed him up, but holy hell, that kid got some air time. It was so good, but yeah. So that's the iron. I'm getting choked up right now thinking about it. That's the Iron Claw.
Yeah. Touching on Kevin's kids real quick. Did you? I assume you know now. Kevin had 2 daughters before he had Marshall and Ross. They were omitted from the film for whatever reason. They have their daughters are Kristen and Jillian, which I thought was very interesting narrative choice to just not have the daughters in there. Maybe they didn't want to be in the movie, but I thought that was funny.
I actually didn't know that.
All right, nice. Shout out to Kristen and Jillian.
Sure, yeah. I looked up on the Von Erichs. There's a Wikipedia page just for the Von Erich family. It just outlines like the different generations of them. And there's a small tree, and it does not mention 2 daughters, just says Ross and Marshall, which is weird because it even mentions a daughter that David had that passed away in infancy. But doesn't mention 2 of Kevin's other kids.
I know this because I somehow fell like down a rabbit hole after I finished the movie. I was like, what are his kids doing? I know what Marshall and Ross are doing. Because I was like trying to do the math. It's like, well, he has this many kids. Who are the other 2? Or I think I just like came across like, oh, he has 2 daughters. I'm like, well, where the hell are they? Clearly not in the movie. Blah blah blah. Also not in this family tree that I'm looking at that you mentioned. Either someone didn't know about them or the ladies didn't want to be found.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Huh. All right. Fair play.
Only other fact I kind of know is so
maybe
Ross,
that's it then. It's probably not because the movie at the end mentions 4 kids and 13 grandchildren. So that must mean that the 4 kids means they're actual 4 kids, and not
Kevin and Pam's
2 other grandchildren.
4 kids, and then Lacey's maybe somewhere in the picture. I think Lacey has kids. And then there's also Holly, who was another daughter of Carrie. So maybe she's in there too. But yeah, big old family they got. Only thing I know,
family.
Yeah, only thing I know about their kids in terms of like the ones that are in the scene was Lacey. She did wrestling for a couple of years, then she retired and went to open her own advertising company, I think. And then Ross and Marshall are actually wrestling out in MLW currently, Major League Wrestling. So yeah.
All right. Any further closing thoughts on the film before we move on to the closing segments?
I will say that one thing that I've heard about, because at one time I was like watching YouTube and I got an ad for the movie that I just decided not to skip, and it was an extended like interview kind of thing with a bunch of people working on the film. One of them being Chavo Guerrero Jr., who is their like wrestling coordinator essentially. And I know for a fact that Zac Efron basically did his own stunts. Like he got actually in the ring, took bumps, did proper training, all that. I assume the other boys did it too. You know, Jeremy Allen White, who plays Carrie, and the other 2 actors whose names I don't know. I I remember recognizing in the beginning of the film Chavo Guerrero Jr.'s wrestling Kevin. I looked into like the credits. I think he's supposed to play like the Iron Sheik or someone like kind of close proximity to that character.
Yeah, he's the Arab guy, right?
Yeah. Other thing that stood out to me. So one, shout out to Zac Efron and anyone else who like literally did their own wrestling. That's nuts. When they had that scene of Kevin Harley Race wrestling on the outside and he gets suplexed on just straight up concrete. I asked myself, I'm like, okay, I know this happens in actual wrestling because people love hurting themselves for my entertainment. I had to think to myself, like, did Zac Efron take a real back bump on concrete for the sake of this movie? I don't know. And I don't know if I want to know. But if he did, that guy's real committed. Shout out to you, man. And then one of the executive producers is Maxwell Jacob Freeman, a.k.a. MGF, who is a prominent wrestler in the scene right now, which I thought was interesting because I know he had some really minor acting role, allegedly. I don't know who he played or where he was on screen. He was supposed to be like a Von Erich who's not actually a Von Erich. He was like... I don't know. It was weird. I looked into it, didn't find much. But he was an executive producer, which I thought was really cool. I don't exactly know what producers do in movies, but being executive producer on a movie like this is, kudos to MJF. That's all I got. Also, actually, no, I got a little bit more. I'm sorry. So we mentioned before that the Von Erich is not like an actual name. It's their like ring name, their stage name. The real name's Atkinson. The Von Erich name got started, I believe, with Fritz. If not, maybe his like father or whatever.
Yeah, no, Fritz actually changed his legal last name to Von Erich.
Okay, that part I missed.
If I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure.
So the way he got started with that name was when he was a wrestler at some point in his career. His in-ring character was a Nazi, and Von Erich's supposed to be a German last name.
Yeah. So
that was an interesting fact I found. And then after Kevin sells the promotion to Jerry Jarrett, Fritz loses it. He gets really upset. And I believe he sues Jerry Jarrett for like the promotion back. I assume he wins. Or I know he gets like WCPW back in his hands. But then like immediately after like getting it back, he has to like close it out and like goes bankrupt or whatever. And I'm like, bro, what was the point? And then at some point he died of cancer. From like smoking or some shit, maybe. I don't know. That's all I got for real this time.
Yeah. I hold no sympathy for that man. Nope. I'll say that much.
I possibly held way too much sympathy for Doris because she was not much better, but
yeah, I mean, Doris is a harder case because she, while didn't actively, at least portrayed in the movie again, didn't actively do things to really harm the boys. She definitely didn't do anything to help them. So she took a very passive bystander stance, like you mentioned earlier, with especially that like the beginning of the movie where Kevin comes into her room and is like, hey, you should tell dad to lay off. Mike especially. Mike isn't really up for wrestling. He wants to do his own thing. And she's like, that's a you guys problem. You guys can work it out. If you got emotional baggage, go work it out with your brothers. She takes a very much that stance to it. And then also there's the religious aspect where she just puts too much faith in God and God's plan and so on. While I'm not going to call, like, she's not a bad person. She just went about her parenting the wrong way, but it also, like, it was the only way she knew how to do it and also get herself through all of the trauma. So unfortunately it comes at the cost of kind of leaving her kids high and dry in terms of having somebody else to lean on. That is an adult parental figure. So Doris is a much harder sort of topic to talk about and demonize because she inherently didn't like, it's a much more moral gray area is where I'll leave it. So that being said, let's move on to the ending segments where I begin with how much this movie cost and how much this movie made. What do you think this movie cost to make, Justin?
I'm going to go under the assumption that this wasn't a financial loss. Okay. So it's a movie made in like 2023, 2024, whatever.
Yep. Came out about 4 months ago.
This is probably lowballing it, but I'm going to say $100 million. How far did I shoot up or down?
Oh, you shot so far up.
Sorry, that's how much it took to produce it. That's what I meant to say. That's how much it cost to produce it. I still might be wrong, but...
Oh, no, yeah, you're horribly wrong. Yeah, no, this... you want to give it another go? I'll tell you to slash it in half by a minimum. Nah, you're going to have lower.
25 million.
$15 million this movie was made for.
That's cheap, I think. I don't know. I don't have much of a modern scale of how much movies take.
That's like fairly cheap for a movie of this budget. Now, I will say this film was produced by A24 Studios.
Shout out to them. They are making bangers.
They nonstop make these incredibly artistic and sometimes profound movies that have a lot of meaning behind them. So along with this, they also tend to end up on the cheaper side of movie making because they employ a lot more camera techniques. And also, I mean, this movie is a little bit of an exception in the idea that they use a couple more big names like Zac Efron and Jeremy Allen White. That's his name, right?
Shout out to the bear.
Shout out to the bear. Still gotta watch that one. They're like bigger names, but most of a lot of the other people in this movie, outside of I guess the next best or the next biggest name I'll say is like Pam. Maybe what's her name again?
I forgot her name, but I recognize her face.
Lily James.
Yeah,
Lily James. She's like maybe the next biggest name. Somebody's going to crucify us for forgetting. I don't know, somebody probably.
The guy who plays Fritz, I've seen him in a lot of movies. He's been around for a while.
Okay. That's fair. So anyway, either way, like they use names, but they make these movies for relatively cheap. And so $15 million was the budget of this movie. Now, with that in pocket, how much money do you think this movie made in the last 4 months? It probably isn't going to make much more money. I
think it was
theaters,
positive, but definitely not that much positive. I'll give it a good old $50 million intake, whatever, the box office.
Not too shabby. You shot over a little bit.
Damn.
But pretty damn close. We're at a semi-respectable positive number of $41 million.
All right.
So this movie, thankfully, did make money, and probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about in the net positive of 10 million or so if you just double the budget for marketing. And so yeah, I mean this movie could be considered a relative success. I wish it was a bigger success.
I do too.
Because this was and A24 tends to always find success anyway, because again, they make these very kind of niche movies, but are very well produced and directed and told to you. So A24 is not like going to go out of business for this, but they may, I don't know, think twice about doing similar sports biopics or stuff more rooted in real life as opposed to anything else they've done so
I'll
far.
say this.
But either way,
I think the barriers to this movie in terms of potentially being a bigger success is one, everyone knew it was going to be sad, right? Either because you're a wrestling fan or slash historian and you kind of already know that, or you're just a casual moviegoer and you hear things through word of mouth. And the other obstacle that I find online is a lot of wrestling fans will walk into this movie thinking that they are the target audience, which they might be, but I think they walked in with an expectation of like they're watching a wrestling program, right? Like they're watching a tournament or a pay-per-view essentially. And that's really not what you're getting in this film. Wrestling environments take a forefront, but the actual wrestling in terms of what's happening in the ring is really like second string at best in this film in terms of like its importance, which I think I've heard a lot of people just like not loving that, which is a little sad because I think they're like losing out on so much more from this movie, what it has to offer. But what I will say is I'm a very, very casual moviegoer. I also don't watch many movies these days because I'm just busy with life. But the fact that I know of A24 as a production company, and I've seen like of the movies I've seen in the past, I've probably seen more of their movies than any other company or production, whatever. So they're doing things. They are. If I see an A24 movie and I can find time, they got my butt in a seat at a theater. I'll say that much.
They've cooked.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, $41 million. commercial relative success. Hopefully, I don't know what sorts of areas of sports biopic they could delve into. There's probably plenty, but I hope this isn't a red flag for them to stop something like this. And I don't think it is. I think A24 has always kind of done their own thing and pushed the boundaries of filmmaking with a lot of their stuff. So they're not afraid to tell stories. And I think that's great. But moving on to what some other people thought of this movie, we've got some Letterboxd reviews for you.
Boy,
I've got some pretty good ones here, and I am excited to read some of them for you. So right off the bat, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to give you a 2-for-1 special on reviews here. So, and the reason I'm giving you this 2-for-1 special is because both of these reviews have the same star rating and have the same subject matter. So I was like, I'm just gonna sandwich these things together and really dunk on the fucking dad. When your first review, when your family curse, quote unquote, is just the mere existence of your father. And then what if the real Von Erich curse was the dad we had along the way? I thought that one was especially good. The second one.
Awesome.
That one was incredible.
Oh, man. Okay. What did these people give it versus what would I give it? I'm definitely giving it a 5 personally. However, if I'm these people, I'm these reviewers, they're clearly upset by Fritz. I don't think it's a 5. My gut's telling me it's not 5. I'm going to give it solid. I'm going to say 4.
Oh, Justin.
Don't tell me it's 3.5.
You nailed it, buddy. They're both 4-star reviews.
Let's go.
Yeah, these people really enjoyed the movie, but I think some aspect of Fritz, I don't know what it could have possibly been, may have knocked them down to a 4-star review.
I think it's because Fritz in the movie gets off almost scot-free. Maybe if they put in the end credits that he dies of cancer, someone would have given it a 5.
Yeah, or you throw the divorce thing in there as at a bare minimum. Like, it can be implied by Doris finally taking a stand and doing the painting thing, but it's never explicitly stated. So yeah, you're right. It feels a little like Fritz never sees consequences for the way he raised his children. The family curse is a mere existence of your father was actually the 3rd most liked review on Letterboxd. There are a fuck ton of reviews for this, by the way. And some of the most likes I've seen across any movie reviews that we've looked at. And that could be just recency bias, or hopefully more likely because people care about this movie and will continue to care about this movie for a long time. So that one was good. On a lighter note, I found a really funny review that I enjoyed. This reviewer says, practicing the iron claw on my popcorn.
I'm gonna swing up and say a 5.
You're on the ball today, dude. That's a 5-star review.
Let's go.
Oh my gosh, 2 for 2. Oh, this is great. You're doing great. You're really good at this review thing lately. The last couple of times I've had you on for stuff, you've been nailing them, dog.
I think
you read Letterboxd reviews when I'm not looking.
Definitely not. I honestly, prior to this setup of Panda View and your work on it, I had no idea Letterboxd existed. And honestly, up until like semi-recently, I've never heard anyone else utter the website's name besides you, except until some other people who are like movie cinemaphiles are like, damn, I gotta crack open my Letterboxd account to review for this one because this one slapped or whatever. So yeah, I think I'm just finally really, at least for this movie in particular, I am the reviewer, you know, like I'm really in tune with the people writing about this movie so far. Watch it all come crumbling down. Next question.
That's great. Yeah, let me give you a review on going back towards some of the more seriousness. So we've got this person saying, rock solid, but never exceptional. I wish it surprised me with its filmmaking, rather than just coasting by on good execution of the basics. It's elevated immensely by its unbelievable true story. Nonetheless, I felt like I was simply told about a tragedy rather than made to truly feel it. Zac Efron is both physically and emotionally committed, as is the rest of the cast, and I can tell the filmmakers wanted to do this story justice. And in many ways they did. I just can't help but feel there's more beneath the surface in just about every scene, and the film never took the dive. Which is kind of true.
I think they're absolutely right, except I don't think this person actually knows what they're asking for.
Yeah, they're asking for a significantly more depressing experience.
And a longer one.
That, and a much longer one.
I think that's a solid 4.
Streak ends here. Yeah, this one, they knocked it down an extra star here to 3 stars. Because they really felt like they were missing out on something in this movie. I think they're wrong in the sense of no. I don't think they know what they're actually asking for. That's like seeing a video on YouTube and be like a mild video of somebody getting hurt on YouTube and being like, this. I feel like this person got more hurt, and then they go to like Live Leak and find a video of like someone actually getting shot. Like that's what they're at. That's the level what they're asking for. So I agree that there is definitely something beneath the surface that they maybe could have done more with, but I disagree that that they're just coasting by on good execution of the basics in this film. I think they do a lot more, and simply being told about a tragedy rather than made to truly feel it. I think that's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
That they say that.
I don't like. I don't know what your emotional IQ is there, reviewer. But if you were left feeling not enough or nothing at all, potentially, I don't know what to tell you, man. That's a skill issue and a half.
Yeah. So next on the dock, we've got another kind of longer one, but something that is a little more upbeat. A suplex to the heart, a power bomb to the soul. There's a complicated balance in traversing a story as tragic as the Von Erich family, but so much of why the film works is because it's unafraid to challenge the prison of toxic masculinity. Men at their physical apex who seem invincible, but were at their most vulnerable. The entire cast is perfect, but not enough can be said about Efron. The anchor to the emotion, so much of the pain can be seen in his face and eyes. Can't help but feel happy to see his talents finally utilized properly, but also I'm sad because this movie is heart-shattering.
There was something in that review that sparked a thought, and I immediately lost it that I wanted to bring up, so hopefully it comes back to me.
You hate to see it.
All right, what would I give this if I'm this reviewer? What am I rating this? Do I believe this person views this movie as a 5? Something in my gut's telling me no, so I'm gonna give it a 4.5.
Oh, your logic was there. It is not a 5-star review, but they went half a star further, and they made it a 4-star review.
Breaking even tonight, a tragedy.
Yeah. Well, we got one more.
Ooh.
I got one more for you. And maybe this can tip the odds one way or another. In your favor or not, we'll find out. This reviewer says, love how they had to film the dance sequence from the waist up because Zac Efron still has that Disney Channel pep in his step. Referring to the wedding scene.
Huh. Ah, man. All right, this one feels hard for some reason. Screw it, we're slamming a 4 down. Calling it a day.
Should have slammed a 5, buddy. No. After a strong start, you go 3 in the negative. Ooh, that's tough.
Hate to see it, kids. Hashtag burst swept by
5-star
myself.
review. A little bit of beginner's luck there. Yep. All right. So yep, that's all of the Letterboxd reviews I have for you. And that is also all of the podcast we have for you. Unless you have any final closing thoughts. Did that thing that popped into your head during the other review come back, or are we gonna leave that up in the air?
I don't think so. But what I will say, closing thoughts, is that this movie is really well. It's a good movie. It's a sad movie, but it's a really good movie. What I would say is, honestly, if you're just a male, like if you're just a dude in America or anywhere else in the world, I think you can gain something from this movie. Whether you're our age in our like mid to late 20s or older, and maybe had a much similar upbringing as the Von Erich families, or if you're even younger than us. But I think this movie has a lot to teach a male audience if you're receptive to it. And that's what I will say about the movie.
All
What
right.
about you?
Very nice. I agree. I think there's something to be learned, especially about developing emotional vulnerability in the context of or in the confines of this film. You know, just watching Kevin's journey through Zac Efron's acting, incredible acting, and seeing his journey to, like, he already cared about his brothers, but in a sort of brotherly, like, camaraderie sense, and a little bit less so in like a really deeply caring family sense, but he develops that over time through, unfortunately, all of the loss that he experiences. And he does come out the other side a better person. And so I think, you know, in general, I mean, especially men that struggle with it, but anybody can really learn to maybe embrace that side of them a little sooner, if not for yourself, but for the potential sake of other people in more drastic situations. So that's what I'll say there.
Nice. And with that, thank you for listening to our podcast today. If you wish to follow us on social media, you can follow us at Panda Sightings on Instagram and Twitter. If you wish to reach out to us with an email of sorts, you can email us at pandasightings@gmail.com. We have a Patreon. So shout out to Twigo in particular, or shout out to all of our Patreon producers and people who donate to us in general. Could not do this without you. But in particular, Twigo, I believe you recommended this movie. And yeah, I have something to say after this. So shout out to Twigo, shout out to all our Patreon producers and supporters. If you wish to join them, patreon.com/pandasightings. We have a Redbubble merch shop with lots of cool stuff, mostly pertaining to our One Piece of the Line podcast. Go check that out if you somehow got here but haven't. We're on YouTube now. You can catch all of our podcast episodes there. And am I missing anything else? We have a Discord. Yes, join our Discord. We have lovely community members. You could be one of them. I believe that is generally everything for the plugs. And with that, I will add a little tidbit to close out. So Twigo, I believe, is the one who asked for this movie, correct?
That is correct.
So funny enough, I think the day before, the day after, no, it had to be before. So before you had told me that this is what Twigo asked for, I remember listening to the podcast episode of Vassal Kingsgrave reviewing this movie, as I mentioned before. I was at just like waiting for the bus to go to work, listening to this podcast episode, and they're giving me, you know, a breakdown of like what's happening in the movie and, you know, doing all this bunch of analysis. And I was like, wow, this movie sounds incredible. I wanted to see it and also wanted to see it with the guys, but I don't think they would really be up for it. It's like, you know, it's wrestling related. No one's really into it like me. It's also like heavy movie. I don't think anyone's necessarily trying to voluntarily sign up for that like I would. And a part of me, when I was sitting at that bench, I was like, you know, I could try to be sneaky and ask one of our producers to like do me a solid and be like, hey, could I ask you to recommend a movie in my honor? And I never got a chance to do that because Twigo read my mind across the ether. So shout out to Twigo. Thank you very much.
You're just going to solicit one of our patrons to fulfill your desires?
Well,
what an animal.
Listen, I think you're seeing it way too much in my own benefit. It could collectively benefit all of us, all right? We all could have gained something from this movie. That's all I'm saying, man. We could have bonded, could have forged a brotherhood, much like the Von Erich family, all right? I
mean, you're right. You're not wrong. I definitely feel better as a person for having watched this. But just the idea that you were sitting on I'm imagining you sitting on this bench, like wringing your hands together, like, oh, who should I get to do this for me?
It is far less nefarious than that, but it was a thought that crossed my mind.
Oh gosh, I love it. All right, we're done here. We're out. This was a long one. I hope you stuck around for the entire thing. If you're listening to this, obviously you did. If you didn't, I hope you come back one day. Panda Sightings out.